is blurry. Oh my gosh. That's what it looks like when I don't have glasses on.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Community Church. This is week 3 of our series called Not Feeling It. It's about relationships. My name is Joanne, and this is Community Church Online. Hey, if you're new, we're so glad you joined us. Please do us a favor and go to communitychurch.net/connect and fill out the form, and we'll send you some free coffee in the mail. In case you guys have some kiddos at home, we have new programming for our kids every single week. Just check out our app, our website, or YouTube to find those videos. Everything that we've been able to do around here and in the community have been thanks to the generosity of so many people. If you would like to partner with us and support the things that we've been doing, go ahead and go to communitychurch.net/give. In case you haven't heard, we are relaunching with 2 services on March 7th at 9:15 and 11. Our in-person services are going to be socially distant and at limited capacity, so that means you need to register. However, if you prefer to stay home, we're going to continue our online services every week. Thanks for joining us this week. I hope to see you guys on March 7th. Enjoy the rest of the online service.
Though darkness fills the night, it cannot hide the light. Whom shall I fear? You crush the enemy underneath my feet. You are my sword and shield, though troubles linger still. Whom shall I I know who goes before me, I know who stands behind. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The one who reigns forever, he is a friend of mine. The God of angel armies is always by my side. My strength is in your name, for you alone can save. You will deliver me, yours is the victory. Whom shall I fear? Whom shall I fear? I know who goes before me, I know stands behind. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The one who reigns forever, he is a friend of mine. The God of angel armies is always by my side. And nothing formed against me shall stand. I know who goes before me, I know who stands behind. The God of angel armies is always by my my side, the one who reigns forever. He is a friend of mine. The God of angel armies is always by my side. I know who goes before me. I know who stands behind. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The one who reigns forever. He is a friend of mine. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The God of angel armies is always by my side.
Well, guys, I'm so glad that you came into counseling today. I think this is going to be great for all of us. You know, when married couples add kids into the mix, it can actually put a wedge in the marriage and it'll push you two apart. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm going to be the kid and I want you guys to have a regular conversation. Susan, you start.
Hey, honey, how's your day?
Fine.
Papa! Papa, please help me, Papa!
Okay, can you stop doing
Papa, I've skinned my knee, Papa!
I need you to stop doing
Papa, it's scabbing, please, I need a Band-Aid!
Please stop doing that.
Papa, please!
Please! Would you stop doing that?
All right, so this week we're continuing our series on relationships. We're looking specifically at romantic relationships, but we're also talking about some principles that kind of can overflow into our other relationships as well. What we said was that there are really, when it comes to romantic relationships, there are really like two extremes, you know? There are the relationships that are chasing this feeling of closeness. You might call it feeling in love, like a feeling of having found the one. This is when you've got butterflies in your stomach and it's just people are head over heels, and that's a lot of fun and that's great. But what happens in relationships like that is that often they're hot and cold, they're up and down. There's really no foundation there, and so often these relationships don't last, right? And that's the relationship that's built on a feeling. But then there's this other end of the spectrum, and we see this a lot, especially in church settings, right? This is the more like traditional idea of a relationship, and it's a relationship that's built on a choice. It's a relationship that's built on a commitment. And while this is good, and while this is important, a lot of times what happens in this kind of relationship is that there are two people who have just decided that no matter what, they'll never leave each other, but the relationship itself loses that feeling, maybe the feeling that kind of started the whole relationship, and it just kind of becomes this picture of like lifelong roommates, where you have these people that live together, they share the same home, they share the same bills, the same kids, but there's no feeling whatsoever. And so like I said, that might be a little bit of an oversimplification, but typically those are the two ends of the spectrum. And what we want to do over the course of the next couple weeks is really look at a third option. This is the healthiest option. You may have seen this, you may even be living in one of these right now, but it's a relationship that has the stability and the foundation of the choice, but has the passion of the relationship that's built on the feeling. It's a beautiful marriage between the two. And what we said was that really to get there, we have to understand that feelings, not just in romantic relationships, but in everything, right? Like feelings are followers. Feelings happen in response to something. It's not easy to just make yourself feel some way. It's the response, because feelings are followers. And what we said is in the context of romantic relationships, feelings follow choices. Feelings follow choices. And so we've been looking at some choices that the feeling, The feeling that we're all looking for in a relationship, the feeling will follow. Choices that the feeling will follow. The thing that we're talking about today is not an easy shift to make. It's not one that people necessarily like to make. But what I've found is that in my experience, and with a lot of people that I've spoken to, this idea is really like one of those light bulb moments. Like all of a sudden, while it may not necessarily become easier to find that feeling in a relationship, all of a sudden things start to make sense. This kind of charts the course. It makes things a little bit more clear for us when it comes to finding that feeling of closeness and intimacy in a relationship. The idea, like I said, it's a difficult idea to adopt. You might even like push back against it a little bit, but hang with me here, humor me. And I think what you'll see is that there's some pretty profound principles that were written literally about 2,000 years ago and still apply, still are just as powerful today. So what we're looking at today is a letter that was written to a church in a city called Ephesus. Like I said, like almost 2,000 years ago. And this is really when the church, like Jesus followers, first really became Jesus followers. Churches like really had just started. And the Apostle Paul is the guy who wrote this letter. He's an early church leader, a really influential guy. And he wanted to kind of pitch this idea of a marriage the way that God designed it. And while, like I said, you might push back a little bit when you hear this, or this might be something you're familiar with, but to the people that he was writing to, this was absolutely crazy, totally countercultural. It would have been just absolutely ludicrous. But what we're finding out, and what some of them would come to find out, is that these principles, they work. They work. So let's dive into it. We are in, like I said, a letter to a church in a city called Ephesus. We call it Ephesians. This is in chapter 5. And here it is. He says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now, this is not in like any, you're not going to see this line in any romantic poem. You're not going to see this line written out in any Hallmark card because it's not romantic. It's not exciting. The idea of submission is not something that anybody jumps at. When I was growing up, I used to really like the whole idea of WWF, right? And now it's WWE, I think, because they got in trouble with the World Wildlife Federation. But it was this, professional wrestling. It was fake. It wasn't real. It was an all big show. But there was this whole thing of like submission. When you put someone in a headlock, they could submit, and that meant that you lost. And so I don't really like the idea of submission. Most of us did not grow up thinking like one day I can't wait to find someone I could submit to, right? Anyway, he says submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Like not out of reverence for the other person, not out of respect for the other person, not out of love for the other person, not in response to what they've done, but in response to the fact that you are loved and cared for. The fact that God himself gave everything for you in Jesus, which is really like, if you're not familiar with it, it's a whole totally radical, life-changing story. But his idea here is out of that message that you believe, like draw from that love, like the ability to submit to one another. Now, again, no one wants to do this. However, what's really interesting is that what we're finding out today, like in all the research and studies and experiments, what we're finding out today is that the number one predictor of divorce, predictor of a relationship that's just not going to make it, the number one ingredient in a relationship where there is no feeling, the number one thing is something we call contempt. Contempt is when you look down on someone. When you put yourself and your opinions and your needs and your desires above them because how they feel and what they need really is just not that important. It's not that significant. It's putting yourself above. If contempt has an opposite word, probably the closest verb to the opposite of contempt is submit. If contempt is putting yourself over someone, then submission is willingly placing yourself, your needs, your desires under the needs, desires, wants, opinions, like of somebody else. When you submit to someone, you're serving them, really. Like, that's the idea of submission. I am subjecting my will and my desires, my energy, like I am subjecting it to you and your will, your desires. Now, that's easy to say, but it is so hard to practice. And again, I didn't say this was going to be easy. I'm just presenting the facts to you. And right now, the facts that we have are that, like 2,000 years ago, this guy Paul says, you should submit to one another out of reverence for Christ in response to what Jesus has done for you. And today, what we're learning is that, well, the worst thing you can do is the opposite of submission, right? Which is pretty like, whoa, mind-blowing. It's like he's a little bit ahead of his times here when he's writing that back then. So if we like simplify it, again, let's like kind of funnel this down. Let's put it into like a little bit more modern everyday terms. If we're talking about submission, really, like I said, what we're talking about is serving. Choosing to live for the needs, wants, desires of the other, prioritizing them over yourself. It's like if you're a server in a restaurant, you're not feeding yourself, you are working for the needs, the wants, the wishes, the desires of the person that you are serving. This, to the Apostle Paul, is the key to a relationship. And this is today's choice. It's the choice to serve. Last week, we talked about the choice to give, like to love is to give. This is the choice to serve, and this is a choice that the feelings of closeness that we're looking for will follow. The choice to serve. Now, again, like I think we need to stop and make another little disclaimer. If you've been in a relationship for a long time, maybe you hear this and you get like a little bit defensive, right? I might too. Like, hold on a second. I have been serving my wife. I have been serving my husband since the day we got married, right? I am constantly serving, and there's still this constant, like we're constantly running into issues. So what's the deal here? And this is the little like light bulb that I was talking about earlier. This is where a lot of times it starts to make sense for people. Serving. The reason that it often doesn't reap the fruit, right? The reason that we often don't see the results that we want to see in a relationship when we serve one another is because we're often not meeting the felt need of the other person in the relationship. So think about it like this, right? Like, let's say I decide one day I really want to serve my wife because I want us to feel closer. I want her to know she's appreciated, and so I'm going to serve her. And so every day before she wakes up, I go over to our TV screen in our living room, and I clean the dust off of it every single morning, and I make sure there are no streaks, and it just looks so great every single day. And then I leave for work. Well, my wife takes care of a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and while, yes, they do use this TV sometimes, she is not really, like, bothered all that much by the fact that maybe there's like a fingerprint on the TV screen. And so while it's good to keep a TV screen clean, I might be working for a need that, one, she may not be aware that I'm even doing, and two, she's definitely not feeling like needs to be met. And a lot of times, this is what we're doing in our relationships. We're doing things that matter. We're doing things that need to be done, right? But oftentimes, we're not meeting the need that is most felt by the other person in the relationship. And here's where Paul's words are just magical. Ready? They don't sound magical, especially if you don't look at it like through the context of everything that's happening here, but just hang with me. He says this: submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Then he repeats himself. He says, wives, submit to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. That's extreme. Then he gives instructions in verse 25 to the husbands. He says, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. He tells the wives they need to submit. He tells the husbands they need to love, right? And a lot of times, like in a lot of little church circles, often the men will see that part to the wives, be like, see, women need to submit to men, right? And if somebody says that to you, just be like, yeah, that's true. That's at least what Paul says. But let's rewind one verse where he says, submit to one another. Husbands also need to submit to their wives. So what's going on here? Well, in verse 25, he tells the husbands to love their wives. But he is also told, like all of the church, that they should love one another. In fact, those were like that's his new command. That's his like marching orders. Jesus says, love one another as I have loved you. So what's the deal? Like, why is he reiterating to these people what they need to do? We like to look at this often in light of what we think the husband's role is and what we think the wife's role is. But more likely, or at least just as likely, this is speaking to the need of the husband and the need of the wife. Just as, if not more importantly, then it speaks to the role of the husband and the role to the wife, of the wife. So what Paul is saying here is that, like, for the husbands, there's a need to know and to feel the submission for the wife, right? And for the wives, there's a need to know and to feel, to see, to understand the love coming from the husband in a way that it doesn't necessarily work, like, inversely, right? Like, the wife doesn't need to feel the submission, though it's important, doesn't need to feel it and see it as badly as the husband needs to see it. And the husband doesn't really need to feel and like see and understand the love like the way that the wife does. In fact, Paul kind of summarizes right at the end of this section. Speaking to the husbands, he says, each one of you must also love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. He's not saying husbands don't respect your wives. He's not saying wives don't love your husbands, but there's a way that the husbands need to feel respect that the wives don't, and there's a way that the wives need to see and feel love that the husbands don't. Now, I'm making some generalizations here, and this may not be totally true across the board. In fact, you might disagree with me, you may not feel this way, and if that's the case, that's totally fine. But what we have found is that the vast majority of men, like today, in studies done today, in research done today, the vast majority of men say they would much rather be unloved than disrespected. And most women say they would much rather be disrespected than unloved. What Paul is speaking to here is the felt need, the need that the husband needs to meet in the wife, and the need that the wife needs to meet in the husband, right? And if we're not doing this, then we're just like cleaning the TV screen when nobody wants it cleaned. So what does this look like, right? What does it look like to respect a husband? What does it look like to love a wife? Well, one I could probably speak to a little bit better than the other. And if you want to go a little bit deeper into this, last year, right around this time, we did a series where we talked about this. But here's the gist of it, right? Like, when you think of a man needing to be respected, again, this is a generalization, but think of like a little boy who wants to be the hero, a little boy who wants to be the rescuer. Right? Like, that little boy grows up and wants to be a man who is, most men won't say this, but men love the idea of being the hero. Most teenagers, right? Like middle schoolers and high schools, young male athletes, like dream about being the one that hits the game-winning home run, being the one that makes the game-winning shot. Why? Because there's this deep, deep desire to be trusted in, to be the hero, to be counted on, to be adequate, to know that you can take your family, your people, the people that are counted, that you can take them through, that you can bring them to where they need to be. There's a Christmas movie, it's called Jingle All the Way. It's with Arnold Schwarzenegger and some other people. But basically the whole idea is that this little boy is in search of this Turbo Man doll, and it's his father's job to get the Turbo Man doll for him. And he kind of blows it. Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of blows it throughout the movie, and he's just trying to get this doll for his kid. And at the end of the movie, there's this scene where, like, through a crazy series of events, Arnold Schwarzenegger is in the middle of a parade. And in the parade, he is dressed up as Turbo Man. Now, his son and his wife are in the crowd, and they have no idea that he is Turbo Man on that float. So Turbo Man is given a Turbo Man doll, and told that he can give the doll to any kid in the crowd. And of course, he calls out his son, and he gives his son the Turbo Man doll, and then he reveals himself, takes off the mask, and shows him that he is Turbo Man in the parade, and the kid is just stunned. Growing up, I always loved that scene. I thought it was great. You know, I was like, okay, great, the kid gets the doll. But now, as a dad, that scene means like 1,000 times more to me. Why? Because I can relate to the feeling that they're trying to portray in the character of Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Because you see this man who has blown it over and over and over and over again. A man who, like, up until that point is inadequate and unworthy of respect. And not only does he give his son the doll, but he reveals himself as the hero that the son loves, like, throughout the entire movie. The hero that the son is quoting throughout the entire movie. The hero that the doll represents is standing there in the form of his father. And it just gives me the goosebumps all over the place because it's just so magical. But that's the feeling, right? That is the need. That is like the epitome of what most dads want. Like, they want their kids to look up to them as their hero. They want their wives, their family members to count on them as the hero, to know that they're counted on by the people that they love, and to know that there's confidence that they'll come through for them. And so if you want to destroy most men, right, if you want to eat away at that insecurity, that need that they have, make them feel inadequate, laugh at them, right? Like, constantly question their judgment. Make them feel like they've got to explain everything that they do for you. Not that there can't be communication, but just question them constantly. Make them feel like, I don't trust anything that you do. But you've blown it in the past, and I'm sure you're going to blow it again. That will rot away at a man's like need to feel desire, and that will tear away at the intimacy in a relationship. Now, on the flip side, women, like, I'm very hesitant to speak to the needs of women because I don't really know much about that. I'm trying to still figure it out in my own relationship. But what I've learned, and what I can tell you, in fact, I talked about this a little bit last year, is that, like, the epitome of a woman's need to feel loved. If you've ever seen the movie Titanic, right, there's this scene where Rose, who's like the main character in the movie, she walks down this grand staircase, and everybody in the room freezes and looks at her. She's captivating. She steals the attention of everybody in the room. She is worth everybody's attention. From what I understand, like, a woman's need to feel loved often, not always, but often comes from this desire to feel like you are worth everything. Like, if you look at like fairy tales and kids movies and whatever, there's a hero who's often the man, and then there's the princess or the one who needs to be rescued. In that, like, character, the princess, right, it's not so much they want to be in trouble or they want to need a man to come through and rescue them. No, it's that they are worth the risk, the attention, the energy, the effort. They are worth being pursued. That's what's so appealing. That's what speaks to the need of a woman's like desire to feel loved. They want to be pursued. They want to be adored. They want to know they're worth everything. They want to be worth your attention. And so if you want to starve a woman's desire, a woman's need to feel loved, well, then don't give them your attention. Don't take your head away from the TV screen. Don't pick your head up out of your phone. Don't text them throughout the day. Don't communicate with them. Do things that make them feel like they are not captivating. They are not worth your time, not worth your attention. That will destroy the feeling of closeness, the feeling of intimacy in a relationship, because you're starving a woman's need to feel like they're worth it all. That's why the Apostle Paul says here, love your wife like Christ loved the church and gave everything. Everything. Like, he's not so much saying like this is going to cost you everything, but that they need to feel like you would give and will give everything that you have in the same way Jesus gave everything he has for you for the church, for the people that he loves. And here's the crazy thing, right? Like this tends to work in a cycle going the right direction and a cycle going the wrong direction. When a man doesn't feel respected, he tends to disconnect and disengage and not make the woman feel loved, not make her feel like she is worth connection, worth his attention. And when a woman doesn't feel love, she tends to not treat the husband with respect. And so it's a cycle that goes on and on and on. But the cycle can go the other way too. When a woman feels loved, when she feels treasured, when she feels like she has her husband's like complete attention, when she feels like he finds her captivating, it is natural for her to treat him with respect, to look at him with admiration, to count on him, to trust him, to put her confidence in him. And when he feels that from her, he is so much more naturally going to treat her like she is the treasure that she is. He's so much more naturally going to give her the attention that she deserves. It's a cycle that can go the right way, but it's a cycle that could also go the wrong way. It could be a crazy cycle or it can be an amazing cycle, but it all comes back to the choice to submit, the choice to serve. And so what that means is that if your cycle right now is going in the wrong direction, if it's not going in the direction you want it to go, you need to choose to what? To submit, to put the needs, the desires, the wants of your spouse above your own, to serve them. And what that probably means, if you're a husband, is that you need to choose to go out of your way to give your wife the attention that she wants. Help her to feel like she's captivating. Make sure she knows that she is loved, knows and feels that she is loved. And if you're a woman, if you're the wife, then probably what that means for you is choosing to serve by intentionally showing your husband that you respect him. And so here's your homework. If you're married, if you're in a relationship right now, here's your homework. 1, ask, is this true? Like I said, this may not be true across the board for everybody, but ask your husband, do you really have this need to be respected? Ask your wife, do you really have this need to be loved? And then if the answer is yes, ask how. Like, what do I do that feeds this? And what do I do that starves this? And then do it. Then you'll be equipped to make the choice to serve. Like a lot of times we try to do the right thing, but we try in the wrong places. We're cleaning the TV screen when nobody asked us to. So find out what it is that your significant other needs you to do, whether it's love, respect, or something else. And if we do, I think that we'll see that the choice to submit, the choice to serve, is one of those choices that the feelings will follow.